Bounding into comics, Dungeons & Dragons senior game designer disavows how series was made by white dudes, boasts that much of original material would never pass our inclusivity reviews today. So I got an article for you today. More Dungeons & Dragons WoTC drama, and this is never going to be ending. It's never going to be ending because people think that wokeness is the way to be, think that wokeness is the way to go, think that we have to look at everything through the lens of today. Even looking at the stuff that happened 5 years ago and calling it out as problematic because it wasn't viewed through the proper woke lens, because it's an ideology, it's a cult, whatever you want to call it. Now, before we get started, please remember to like, comment, share, and subscribe. Make sure that you're still subscribed because YouTube does unsubscribe people every single day. You can find me on Rumble, on Twitter, BitChute. There's links down in the description. I'll leave a link to this article down in the comments so you can read it for yourself. There is a video included with this article. I'm not going to go through it. We'll talk about it when we get to the video part of this. But let's get into this article here. Starts out, in delivering what is perhaps one of the most self-aggrandizing virtue signals in recent history, current Dungeons & Dragons senior game designer Jason Tondro has taken to proudly touting the fact that much of the series' original materials, which he condescendingly writes off thanks to having been made by white dudes, would never pass our inclusivity reviews today. Right, well, why do you need to be inclusive? D&D has always been available for anyone to play and for anyone to modify however they saw fit. You could play black characters if that was the game that you wanted to play. But, you know, ironically, one of the more recent groups I've been in, it was all non-white people. I was the only white guy there. There was one guy who claimed he was white, but he didn't look white. But one of the players was half black, half Hispanic, and he was playing a red-bearded, white-skinned dwarf and did the whole accent, Scottish accent and everything. You're allowed to play whatever kind of character you want to as long as the game allows it. And it's never been different. Tondro offered his take on current state of the popular tabletop RPG franchise while speaking with official D&D content creator Todd Kenreck in promotion of Wizards of the Coast upcoming series-centric history book, Dungeons & Dragons, The Making of the Original D&D, 1970 to 1977. So this is going to be a book that's coming out, and that sounds like it might be an interesting book because they're going to have like original writings and original drawings and original work done by the creators of D&D, Gary Gygax and Dave, I don't remember the other, Dave Arndt, I can't remember his name. I think it's probably going to be in the article, so when we come to it. This is the video. This is the video right here. I'm not going to click on it. It is 38 and a half minutes long. 35 minutes of that 38 and a half minutes are discussing this book and the early years and the creating of Dungeons & Dragons and that history there, which is interesting, but not the most interesting thing. The last 3.5 minutes are about inclusion and diversity in the game and how, you know, Gary Gygax was a bad man because he said things and thought of things in a white-centric way. Oh, heaven forfend. What a terrible, evil person. Mind you, we have right here the racial demographics of the United States. It's hard to see, it's a bit blurry. In 1970 here, let's go 1970, 1980, you're looking at somewhere between 83% and 80% of the country's population being white. And Gary Gygax living in the northern part of the United States where there's fewer people who aren't white, right? Because the slavery persisted in the South. A lot of Hispanic people come from the South, right? So you get more of that diversity in the southern part of the United States. Not only that, these numbers might be wrong. If you look over here at 2020, we see that 60% of the population in the United States is white. Now, I've seen this percentage, but I've also seen it as high as 70% of the population being white in 2020. So these numbers are definitely off. By how much? I don't know. And this may very well be that in 1970, you're looking at like 90% of the population in the country being white. So where Gary Gygax is living, he's coming across like a non-white person out of every 30 people that he meets. So it was very white. Not to mention the fact that, hey, Dungeons & Dragons, I've said this a million times before, set in medieval Europe, where 99.99% of the population was white for the entire history of that time period. Let's get back to the article. Following the lengthy summary of the book's contents, as well as his own history with the franchise, Tondro was eventually met by the observation from Kenreck that it's important to note that this is a historical document. So there are things in here. It was different. It was a different time. So we've made an inclusivity review of all these materials, in which he enthusiastically replied, multiple. So let's take a step back here. Let's clarify. There are materials in original Dungeons & Dragons that would never pass our inclusivity reviews today. Some of it you can understand. The designer proceeded to argue, like, okay, these are a bunch of war gamers and they're using armies from history, so when they create a warrior class for D&D, they call it the Fighting Man, the original name for the fighter class, because that's what they were used to. They were all men. They were all white dudes from Lake Geneva and the Twin Cities. If you don't know, the Twin Cities is Minneapolis and St. Paul. Yeah, so what? They changed it to fighter probably because maybe they came across some women who were like, oh yeah, we could have like female fighters too. I don't know why they changed it. Maybe the book goes into details as to why they changed it from Fighting Man to fighter. If they left it Fighting Man for a longer period of time, into the 80s and 90s even, I wouldn't even have cared. Who cares if you call it Fighting Man? You could change it. You could have Fighting Man and Fighting Woman. Oh no, we can't do that because that excludes all the transises. Meanwhile, we've discussed this recently on my channel, the etymology of gender, the fact that there's only two sexes, because we've only ever seen two, period. Or a combination of those, a mix-up of those two. That's it. What would the third one look like? I just talked about this in a recent video. What would a third, what would a fourth, what would a fifth, what would a 180th look like? Yes, you read that right. Tondro just dismissed D&D creators Gary Gygax and Dave Arneson, that's his name, David Arneson, as nothing more than ignorant white dudes. Following this insult, he continued, but that's just the tip of the iceberg. There's a lot of material in this book, and I won't go over it all. I won't go over all of it, but it would not pass our inclusivity review today. We couldn't change it. It's history. What we can do is acknowledge it and show how far we've come, because that's not D&D anymore. So D&D's always been very racially diverse, as far as I can tell. I mean, maybe not in the very early days. So the first version of Dungeons & Dragons I was introduced to was the red box, and I have never seen the white box. I guess there's a brown box. When I was a teenager, I had a friend who's like, my dad had the original Dungeons & Dragons. It was terrible. It was all based on a die 6. It's like, okay. At the time, I was like, really? That's crazy. I didn't know there was one earlier than the red box. And now today, I mean, the best games are based on a die 6 typically. The die 6 system, it's a whole system where you just roll 6-sided. The GURPS system, you roll 6-sided dice. So the 6-sided die is really a good die to use for a game. So saying that is just silly. But point is I didn't even know there was an earlier version than the red box until I was about like 15 years old. And I'd been playing D&D for years at that point. And then, does it matter? Why do we have to look at this and go, they were wrong, they were bad, they were evil, they were stupid, whatever you want to say? They were different. It was a different time. They were looking at the world through that lens. Go back 200 years and you would be owning slaves. Come on, that's just, if you were in a part of the world where slavery was legal, that's just how it was. You can snub your nose up and be like, I would know better. And maybe you would have. There were people 200 years ago that thought it was an atrocity. But the reality is you are a product of your time, of your generation. It's not bad. We move forward, we learn better. And we do better because of it. The fact is that D&D is a game. These are just words and ideas. It's not like they're saying women can't play, black people can't play, Hispanics can't play. They're just saying this is the way we did it because that's what we knew. That's where we were. That's who we were. Turning this virtue signal up to max brightness, Tondro further assured Kenreck, D&D gets more diverse and has a larger audience every day. The more diverse the game becomes, the more people of different genders and ethnic backgrounds and faith see themselves in the game. Then they go make their own versions of the game, and more players start to see themselves represented in the game. The more diverse the creators get, the more diverse the players become. And that's the way it should be. It's never been limited, though. That's it. It's never been limited. I think the first time I played with a person who wasn't white, I was like 9. I think I played with Jose. Jose was my brother's friend. I think it was 10 at the latest. Jose is not a name that you see white guys running around with. So you tell me. So this book is very interesting. So I think it really highlights how far the audience is come and how the game has changed over the 50 years, he concluded. How it's played and who plays it, and how it's created in many different ways. The way that it's created is the part that changes the least, because the huge driver in early D&D was fan creation, and that's still true today. The part that's changed the least is fan creation? No. I mean, that idea has changed the least, but the things that people are throwing into D&D nowadays is just, it's all over the place. So the ideas that are being thrown into D&D have changed quite a bit. Hilariously, that last declaration by Tondro actually proves as a counter to everything he said above as to his point, D&D never barred anyone of any identity from being represented in the game, specifically because its entire existence is based on the fact that the players create their characters and adventures as they see fit. Exactly. If you wanted to play trans people, there was nothing stopping you. And you could do that sort of thing with magic, right? Magic is a type of technology that we don't understand here in the real world. As with all other such declarations that tabletop RPGs were never inclusive, while some individual dungeon masters and story settings may implement some limits on character creation in order to help boost players' immersion for a specific campaign, there has never been any official rule in D&D barring players from assigning whatever traits they want to their completely custom characters. That's not true. That is not true at all. I don't know where they're getting that from. There's never been any official rule in D&D barring players from assigning whatever traits they want to their completely custom characters. No. Maybe they're saying like superficial traits. Like if they're talking eye color, hair color, skin color, you've always been able to describe your character by whatever parameters the GM lays out for you. But if you're talking like, if you're going to play an elf, elves have distinct characteristics, distinct features that are different from halflings, that are different from dwarves, that are different from orcs, and so on and so forth. And that's fine because they are actually different creatures. They're not the same. They're not just all human. Further, it should be noted that it was not just Tondro's interview with Kenreck, which saw an official D&D source feign such peril clutching towards the inclusion of the game's original contents in the making of the original D&D. What follows is the book's official description, wherein 3 sentences are dedicated to describing its actual contents, while a full 6 are used to performatively and excessively assure readers that D&D parent company Wizards of the Coast in no way, shape, or form endorses the problematic subject matter contained within. Let's see what it says here. All right. Here is the ultimate record of how Dungeons & Dragons came to be. The making of original D&D is an extraordinary collection of rare documents that shed light on D&D's original story, uncover materials never released to the public, including Gary Gygax's first draft of original D&D and early published writings such as 1974 original D&D white box booklets and supplements. Each document is featured alongside insightful commentary from one of the game's foremost historians, John Peterson. Disclaimer: We Wizards recognize that some of the legacy content in this product does not reflect the values of Dungeons & Dragons franchise today. Some older content may reflect ethnic, racial, and gender prejudices that were commonplace in American society at that time. These depictions were wrong then and are wrong today. This content is presented as it was originally created because to do otherwise would be the same as claiming these prejudices never existed. Dungeons & Dragons teaches that diversity is a strength, and we strive to make our D&D products as welcoming and inclusive as possible. This part of our work will never end. Well, you can't, I mean, you already probably sold me on the book. You don't have to add to it with this. I mean, come on. Diversity is our strength. Yeah, you would say that looking at 5e. 5e is freaking horrendous. There's just too many rules in it. Almost every single class has magic. And it's like, that's interesting, but I want to have like magic more of a specialty sort of thing instead of going, oh yeah, my barbarian uses magic. That's just how it is. Oh, my ranger, he uses magic too. Oh yeah, the fighter over here, he uses magic. Yeah. It's like almost everybody uses magic. I'm like, let's get into swordplay and stuff. That is the end of the article. It looks like we have we have a couple comments here. I played this game in the early to mid 80s and the rules were fine then. Was not aware they were still changing them. No, the rules were terrible in the 80s. First edition, second edition were Advanced Dungeons & Dragons. Basic set was the red box. The white box was also basic. I never saw the white box. I don't know what it has in it. And there's apparently a brown box. I don't know. The rules in D&D were all over the place. And third edition, starting in the 2000s, streamlined everything. And made it all fall in line. The problem with the rules earlier was that you would roll a die 20 for some things. You'd roll percentile dice for other things. You'd roll a die 6 for some things. You'd roll all these different dice. And you had all these like extraneous rules that didn't really make sense. In third edition, they streamlined everything so that all the rules kind of fell in line with one another. And it was easier to go, okay, well, I'm going to roll this way. In the first 2 editions, you would roll high. Sometimes you roll low. Like, why would you? No, you roll either high or low. There's no changing it because whatever, you got a wild hair up your butt. Which Gary Gygax did not realize, that you should need to have like consistent rules so that everything is easy to expect what you're going to do. But with the newer editions, 3rd, 4th, 5th, I have not seen 4th, I don't know. 3rd edition, I have not looked at it in a long time, although I have the core books for that. 5th edition for sure has this problem. Just too many damn rules. There's so many rules in it. Because everybody has magic. Everybody has new and different abilities, and it bogs down the game. So the Judge Crow says, would you look at that? Wizards of the Coast is also a client of SBI. Surely that's a coincidence, right? Right? I don't know what SBI is. Anyway, one thing I do want to point out here. So we got like an Al-Qadim. Al-Qadim is a Dungeons & Dragons supplement to the campaign setting, a world setting that you could play in. And it came out in 1992, as you can see right here. What's Al-Qadim, you might be thinking? Well, we look at this image right here. This gives you an idea of what Al-Qadim is. I think a very clear idea of what Al-Qadim is. And obviously not a whole lot of white people running around. When I played Al-Qadim, I assumed my character had brown skin and black hair if I played a human. Why wouldn't he? I mean, almost everybody in that part of the world does, especially back in the medieval times, back in the feudal times. You may think, well, that's 1992, Anti-Woke Warrior. I mean, come on, D&D came out in 74. 92. That's almost 20 years later. Okay, well, fine. How about we take a look at this? Oriental Adventures. What is Oriental Adventures? I think this gives you a pretty good idea of what Oriental Adventure is. It's feudal Japan. It's fantasy and adventure in feudal Japan. And this came out in 1985. So a lot closer to the original release of Dungeons & Dragons. And when I played Oriental Adventures, I played a human character. And I assumed that my human character had slanted eyes and black hair. And I didn't bat an eye at it. That's just how it is. I didn't think anything of it. I didn't think it was wrong. I didn't think that I needed to add in white people to feudal Japan and go, because I want to be a white character. I insist that my race be represented here. Urgh. And if you wanted to do this, you could set up different adventure worlds for every different race. But of course, that's not what they want to do. They want to virtue signal and they want to complain and they want to cry bully, because that's what they really are. Is cry bullies. They are not actual fans of Dungeons & Dragons. They're actual fans of pushing their agenda, of pushing woke nonsense, of trying to tear the country apart because, United States bad. When I cry. Because the United States did a bad thing once, however many decades ago. Ridiculous. They want to slam the original creators of Dungeons & Dragons because of who they were, because of their immutable characteristics, and because of their beliefs and thoughts that come from 50 years ago that were culminated even longer ago than that, because I don't know how old Gary Gygax was when he made Dungeons & Dragons. I don't think he was a young kid, though. I'm pretty sure he was well into adulthood before. Dave Arneson, I think he was in his 20s. I think he was fresh out of college when he did it. But Gary Gygax, I think, was a bit older. So anyway, that's all something that you could probably find out if you bought the book. I'm not suggesting that you buy the book, but if you're interested in this sort of thing, it'd be something to buy. I don't want to support the company, but I do want to see this book. I do want to get a copy of this book, but I don't want to give WoTC any money. So it's kind of a conundrum. What do I do, right? Anyway, thank you for watching. That's all I got for this time. And I will see you in the next video.